Hello and welcome back to Uplift Equine Classical Fundamentals. Today we're going to be talking about the rider's seat and position. This is extremely important to note and to know that it is, happening, and what happens with your seat if there are incorrect positions and balance issues that the horse has to overcompensate for. Since towards the end of this video, there is like a half an hour sequence explaining the seat. This slideshow is going to be a little bit short, but I do want to start off thanking my patrons for your support. And if you want to become a supporter, please visit my Patreon, and then you can check out the different levels of support. If you are interested in becoming a YouTube member, that is also an option. But let's get into this. So why is the rider's seat and position so important? The seat is the center of balance for the rider. An imbalanced seat can bring the horse out of balance. So what I mean is if the rider is pitching to one side or the other, the horse has to compensate and sometimes will lose its own balance. There are horses that are specially trained, excuse me, that are specially trained to keep their balance no matter what the rider's balance is, and those are typically therapy horses or para-rider horses, but when it comes to the average horse, an imbalanced seat will bring the horse out of balance. An imbalanced horse will start compensating with muscles that are not designed to be used that way. That's where you get a top line syndrome, dropped back. Sometimes they try to protect their back by just not using the long muscles of their back and using a bunch of short muscles, which causes a lot of tension and soreness. And the fascia tends, in trying to compensate for this, the fascia tends to become out of alignment. So fascia is in alignment when it is healthy, but if it's trying to stabilize something, it will grow thicker and stickier and then more of like a net over the area. So instead of having fascia that moves very cleanly forward and back, or whichever way it's designed to move, it will start stabilizing and getting very stiff, which causes a lot of stiffness and soreness in the horse and leads to pain. A quality seat will empower the horse to move in a healthy way. So when the horse is moving in a healthy way, the horse feels good. They feel powerful. You can see it. If you've ever experienced a horse that enjoys their job, the horse will show that they're enjoying their job. And when they feel good and powerful to do it, that's when you have the intrinsic reward system going on. That's when you can kind of quit with the treats. Because, like I said, like I keep saying many, many times before, if the horse wants to do it, they will do it happily. You just have to teach them the language, and with the Art Plus system, you use those food rewards to help teach them the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s and all of that, and then later you won't need those as much. A horse moving in a healthy way creates a positive feedback loop that will ultimately benefit the rider, giving the rider a type of hippotherapy. So as you know, there are groups that do this thing called hippotherapy, and with a physical issue in a rider, that just at the walk movement actually helps loosen up that rider's their own fascia that has created kind of a net of stabilization due to one reason or another, and it helps them just move passively in a very unique way. And between the environment, the smells, the electromagnetic field of the horse's movement, etc., etc., it really helps that rider relax and just melt into the movement. So when a balanced rider does this and helps the horse move in a healthy way, the horse then helps you move in a healthy way. And it's just a nice little feedback loop. What can help a dysfunctional seat? Now, this is my opinion which has been formed through observation. So if it is safe to do so, like if you have a horse that will allow it in a safe manner, riding in a well-fitting bareback pad, so one that's not going to slide around on you, with no stirrups, and a guided, knowledgeable instructor will help you put yourself into a proper position. Because then the rider has no choice but to go to neutral pelvis and neutral spine. Without the support of the cantle or the pommel or the stirrups, the body, like I said, is forced to become a better position. So in order to not pitch forward, you have to then open up your legs and roll back your hips. And in order to not fall back, you have to come into more neutral and follow the movement properly. Because a lot of people tend to create negative compensatory behaviors because they have huge thigh rolls and cantles that they can lean up against and stirrups that they can lean on. So they feel more powerful than they really should be. The bareback pad kind of puts you in a very vulnerable position, which is why I say do this with a knowledgeable instructor to help you. A lot of the times it helps to be on a lunge line, so your seat is the only thing that you need to focus on. I will do this by myself because I have done this in the past by myself and I kind of know what I'm doing with it, and it forces me to slow down in my horse's training. And it helps my horse to really develop the muscles and the balance before moving on to the next thing. Because, if I was in a saddle, I would tend to be tempted to move on a little bit too quickly because that's the way I am. Then afterwards, moving into a saddle with a better stirrup length and better balance habits, with the seat will improve. So the stirrup length will likely elongate. Now this is with dressage or with Western because they have naturally longer stirrups. If you're jumping, this can still help your seat, but you have to focus on a more relaxed lower leg because your stirrups are much shorter so that you can go into a jump. But if your seat is more solid, you will have more of a tendency to put your weight in your heels instead of trying to squeeze with your knees. And that will help your horse be able to jump higher and more easily. All right, so we're continuing the rider's seat. So we're looking at the rider's seat right now, and I wanted to show you, while not trying to control a horse or being influenced by a horse's movement, even if it's just a little boredom movement. But here I have my little artificial horse stand. It's shaped like a saddle, and with these blankets that I'm using as the backdrop, it kind of puts me in a neutral spine, somewhat ideal position for riding dressage. I know for riding jumping, you want your knees to be up farther, but this is for dressage, and ideally you want to be in as much of a standing position as possible. So if you see riders like this, or even like bracing up against a thigh roll, then they are in a ideal incorrect position. So practicing without any stirrups or on a bareback pad is a good way to reset your seat. And it's going to take more than a few sessions on a bareback pad to reset your seat. You want to ride for a good 3 months to be able to reset. The reason why I say that is because it takes a while for muscle memory to change and for your muscle structure to change, because if you are riding in a seat, let's say like this, or even just like this, that means the muscles that you use are incorrect, and you need to atrophy some of those muscles, or not completely, but atrophy some of them, and then build up others that are more correct. And the more correct your seat is, the easier it is for you to ride the horse. So this is a benefit for both you and the horse, because the easier that is, the easier it is for your horse to actually carry you. And it's just this big cycle. So I'm currently in neutral spine and neutral pelvis. Ideally, you want to stay this way as much as possible, but with the horse's movement, you're going to be moving dynamically. Oh, sorry. You're going to be moving dynamically to affect the weight, to influence the horse in some way. So from the side, I am just draping my legs over. I only have a slight contact with the floor. And as you see, my knees are slightly forward, and I can easily get my heels underneath my hips without tipping my pelvis forward. So if you are bending your knees because your stirrups are too short, you're actually pitching your pelvis forward and falling on basically the horse's forehand. And this encourages the horse, it discourages the horse from lifting you up because it's harder for them to carry you that way. If you're in neutral spine and in a correct position on the horse's back, they are more encouraged to lift up because they're more in front of you. And then if you fall forward, they will drop. The same thing with backwards. Too far back is also bad. And if you're going too far backwards, you're sitting on their psoas muscle, which is used very close to their psoas muscle, which is used to stabilize their hips. So if you overload the weight like that and you're behind the movement, then it's harder for them to push forward. Yeah, they may lift, but you're going to cause some pain around the kidney area. And they will then hollow their back to avoid pain in that area, and then you'll still get a dropped hollow back horse. So that's why ideally you're in neutral spine and you move with the movement of the horse. With the horse moving, so even as good of a rider as I am, if the horse all of a sudden leaps forward and pushes me up, it's easier to stay in neutral in a saddle with stirrups. But the challenge of a bareback pad, which helps build your resistance muscles to this, will fling you forward, and then the horse is then dropped onto the forehand. That's when you start kind of training some controls in there. Maybe they don't leap forward as much, or maybe you build these front muscles so that you can stay, like tighten this and stay in neutral spine while the horse carries your pelvis forward instead of dropping. Because if your muscles are too weak to contract and keep yourself in place, then you're going to fail and hollow your back and fall forward. Hollowing your back, so I'll go into hollowing and bend and curving. So hollowing your back like this is actually really bad for your spine, and if you have a like a spinal condition, you don't, as much as you can at least, I know some people, they have fused vertebra, which hinders them from actually being as mobile in their lower back. But I'm talking to the people who do not have fused vertebra and do not have back problems, but you can create back problems by doing this, which puts you on the front of your pelvis. And for guys, that will be extremely uncomfortable. For girls, it will eventually be very uncomfortable. But you're like this, and all the shock is being pushed into your lumbar spine, which means you're going to have some lumbar lower back issues. A lot of jumpers get into this where they're forward and then they hollow their back thinking that they're going to straighten their back, and then they go into 2-point, which then, if you don't do it correctly, then encourages you to, because in 2-point you want to put a lot of weight into the stirrups, and if you don't put a lot of weight into the stirrups and just try to hold on with your knees, which happens when you try to jump without stirrups as much. I know people try to do it, but they try to do it in jumping saddles whilst staying in jumping position, which isn't good, because then you're encouraged to squeeze with your knees in order to lift yourself up out of the saddle for the same type of jump as you would if you had stirrups. Now people try to show off that way, but it's biomechanically not good for the horse, not good for you. So if you're pitched forward, the horse is then not encouraged to lift up. They're encouraged to just drop. So now the horse is on the forehand, you're on the front of your pelvis, and you're going to get some back pain because you're going to have more action coming up in the hind end. So the hind end's going to be hopping up and down like that, and then it's going to be pushing more force into your lumbar spine. So bringing yourself back to neutral, the other opposite problem is bending or just slouching too much or getting behind the movement. You can see this with a lot of dressage riders and a lot of Western riders who'll put their legs all the way out there thinking that they're bracing properly, but a lot of force is being put onto your coccyx and your tailbone. So you'll start having lower spinal problems and then thoracic problems up here because your back is trying to stabilize itself and then force is being pushed up through your legs. And then in dressage riders, if the horse is hollow, because if you're behind the movement, the horse will eventually become hollow, you've got more movement up and down with the hind end because they're no longer coming under and collecting. You're then concussing your lower back and your thoracic spine with movement and force. So if you see a lot of dressage riders suffering from back pain, generally you'll see them being riding like this, like, in skis, because they've got those huge knee rolls, they're bracing against the knee roll, they're trying to ride the huge movement, and then they're sitting back and they're basically water skiing, and that is actually really tough on your spine. You might not see it immediately, but you will see it if you have a long enough riding career. So that is that position, and then coming back, you can see how far away from neutral spine that is. So this is back on a neutral spine. So both seat bones, you'll feel it. Both seat bones should be equally sitting in the saddle. And then your legs should just drape naturally down. Now, if you have a really wide horse, you might be forced more into like a wide position. And if you don't have a lot of flexibility in your hamstrings, your body is going to bring your knee forward. So you'll kind of start sitting in the chair position. So in order to get out of the chair position, practicing splits and helping elongate your hamstrings is key. So you can see me rotate in and out. Now I can't do a full split, but I'm still flexible enough to be able to rotate my hips like that. And at least in the horses that I train and that I have been taught to ride, that are, the classical high school level dressage horses, what you do is instead of kicking them like that, because that will pitch you forward even slightly, you keep your spine neutral and then you just widen out your hips. Now, if your stirrups are long enough and you are basically standing in your stirrups, you're not going to see your knee come out very much, because you see it's not that big of a movement. And you can see this. So what happens when I do this is I tighten up right underneath of my gluteus maximus. So I think it's so right underneath my gluteus maximus, I'm not tightening my glutes because that will lift me up. And then you see if I tighten my glutes, I'm lifted up, and then the horse will start dropping because they are trying to move away from that. So if you just position your legs out, the backs of your legs will become smaller, so it will start having a shorter distance between the front and the back. So you're opening up the front of your thigh for the horse to lift up in front of you and to engage their shoulder, and then you are putting pressure behind your seat to encourage them to move forward. So that's why if you watch me ride, you're never going to see me kick, and then if you do see me raise my leg a little bit, it's for a lateral movement. So the forward movement is actually just from doing this with my seat, because I want to save my leg for other signals instead of just go. And that's one of the reasons why I don't use spurs, because I don't need them. So just rolling your thigh out tightens this area, which sends signals to the horse's side and then, or the horse's back, and then encourages them to move forward. Now, with most horses that are trained in this way these days, they will be a little confused with this, but after a little while they will start to understand, okay, this is what you mean. And sometimes if I'm riding a horse that I'm unfamiliar with, I will do this first and then add a little bit of leg if they don't respond. And then generally after a few transitions, they start understanding what I'm doing, and they'll start responding to this way quite quickly, because it is more comfortable for them, because the rider's not pitching their weight forward when they're kicking, and they're not being kicked that often. They're just having that light pressure off the seat. And when I'm talking about the seat, I'm talking about from here, like the bottom of your rib cage, all the way down to your knee. So this pelvic movement and leg movement, that's all seat. Your leg would be from your knee down to your heel. So when I say, all right, use your leg, I'm talking about using your calf. I'm like, okay, tap them with your heel a little bit, tap with the heel. So you need to use your entire body for riding horses. That's how you get a horse to move forward, is you rotate out and then it lifts them forward. This helps keep your spine in a neutral position as well, because not getting pitched forward and not getting pitched backwards. You're just widening out, and it actually helps lift your seat a little bit. Not from gluteus maximus lift, from the underside of that lift. And so when you're riding, here should be a little bit sore, but not completely. It's back here that's going to be super sore, and you need to stretch. So doing regular stretching exercises is key for your riding and your riding success. When it comes to shows, a lot of the time, because doing this rotation, people will complain, oh, now I'm getting duck feet. The better your flexibility gets, and the more comfortable you are doing this and rotating your hip and not using your heel this way, the easier it will be to just turn your feet in. So here I'm going to demonstrate the movement that I'm talking about to move the horse forward. And then see, it kind of rotates your feet out a little bit. As your flexibility gets better, you can do that, but then move your toes in. Now, a lot of people are going to have a hard time with this, because this requires a longer hamstring, so a stretched out hamstring. And honestly, stretching your hamstrings out is actually really good for your pelvic floor and your hip joints as well, because it takes tension off of your joints and probably helps with the longevity of your original joints as well. So I encourage this for a lot of people. But if you could see here, I'm going to have my feet in neutral. I encourage my horse to go forward, but I can turn my toes in and still have that correct position. But if my hamstrings are too short, I would not be able to have that mobility of my toes as much. So that's why practicing your flexibility and splits is so important for being a good rider. But we're going to move to the side-to-side movements, because we've done front to back, now side to side. So when you're turning with your horse, if you just stay in neutral spine and allow the horse to go in a circle, say to the right, then the horse will normally curve their body and their barrel will kind of pitch towards the right. So your seat will naturally kind of go to the inside. Now, if it goes to the inside too extreme, you'll start actually pitching the horse off balance, and the horse will start going to the left. And their head will be pointed to the right. They're going to go to the left, and it's physics. The weight is not distributed properly, so they're only trying to catch themselves in accordance with how their body is twisting because of your influence. So you want to stay with neutral spine as much as possible and counteract that movement so that you can stay upright. And that's why, another reason why riding in a bareback pad is so important, because the pad puts you into a correct position. It protects the horse's spine from your seat bone contact. It's more comfortable to ride, you get a little bit of grip, but you don't have any stirrups to make you have kind of like a false sense of security, because stirrups do give you a false sense of security and allow you to be kind of all over the place, but still stay on the horse's back. Whereas a bareback pad will force you into that neutral position, or else you'll fall off. So please do this on a horse that is used to this and well prepared, and please start off at the walk and very gradually move up through the paces. So I'm here, I'm in neutral spine, I'm in neutral seat, and my horse is going to the right, and the barrel will pitch to the right. I'm going to sit my weight to the left. So you can't even really see that much of a difference, but I'm going to sit on the largest curve of the horse's back. So I'm sitting on the place that is lifting me up, so that the horse can carry me evenly without being sent off balance. So the same thing, I'm going to go to the left, I'm going to sit my seat bones to the right and turn my body to the left. So weight opposite of the curve, and then you're going to turn your whole body to go that direction. And so when I say turn the whole body, I'm going to say look in that direction, your shoulders are going to go in that direction, and your hips will actually also go in that direction. So your hips are something that is supposed to be telling the front end of the horse where to go, and your leg, so your knee down, is going to tell the back end where to go. And this becomes extremely important when you start doing lateral work, because that's the side-to-side movement, and you need to kind of separate that the forehand and the hind end movement for the side-to-side. But anyway, your seat, so your knee up through your hips and your back, will control the horse's front end, or tell the horse's front end what to do. So I hesitate to say control, because that means if you do A, then you get B. I say talk to or communicate with, because you will communicate with the horse, but then they still have to respond to get the reaction that you're looking for. So sometimes the horse is not fast to respond, or they don't know how to respond, so that's how you teach. That's why you teach the horse how to respond to these kinds of signals. So if you are going to go to the left, you're going to turn your hips, so move this hip forward a little bit, because that shoulder is going to move forward. And then naturally this hip is going to go back. So really you only have to think of this hip pushing this shoulder forward, and then it will naturally correct. So if you want to activate this hind leg, you just give a little bit of signal with your heel and your calf, just like that, and then activate that outer hind leg. This becomes really important with the canter. So with the canter, you want your inside hip to go forward to get the horse into that left lead. So your inside hip is pitched forward, your outside hip's pitched back, and even though you're moving to the left, the rules change a little bit at the canter, because it's a different type of stride versus the walk and the trot. So the canter, you want to slightly be pitched, the leading leg, so the inside leg, is going to correspond with your inside hip. You're going to be slightly pitched that way. This is going to be slightly pitched back, and then you're going to be activating that hind end with this leg, because the outside leg or hind leg for the horse is the activating leg. So that outer hind leg for the canter is the power leg that pushes the horse forward, and then the inner forehand is what powers the horse forward on that lead. So this becomes extremely important when you're trying to get the correct lead every time. So instead of just kicking the horse forward and then hoping that they go into the correct lead based off of the direction you're going, you are actually telling the horse what lead to go, so you can get a counter lead, you can get lead changes very easily with that once the horse understands that your hip position is what corresponds with their lead. So so I watch a lot of dressage riders when they get their lead changes, they do these extreme movements and leg swings, and they're moving the hips forward and pitching themselves forward and then halfway back, and then they're doing this to get the horse to do these lead changes, and they're looking pretty ridiculous in my opinion. But if you train the horse to be sensitive and not have to really use your heel that much, what you're going to do is you're going to have very slight movements, and you're going to be activating this muscle right here, which you're going to be opening up your leg and activating the hind end with your lower leg there. So you've got your left lead, you've got your right lead, your left lead, your right lead. So there's still some movement, but not as much. And it's this muscle that is telling the horse to change leads instead of down there. So you don't have to, you can have steady contact, and then all you gotta do is that. And you can see my arms are rested on my hips, just like that. And all you're doing is this. And again. So you see that you don't need that much movement to really get the horse to understand a lead change. And then at the same time, if you just do that, you stay in neutral spine. So it's very easy on your back, well, way easier on your back, way easier on your spine and seat bones, and easier on the horse. Because without that extreme movement, they're not encouraged to do this with their rib cage. They're encouraged to stay straight with the rib cage so that they don't get that wobble that you see with a lot of tempi changes. You just get a straight change with a straight spine on a horse. And then when you have a counter lead, you can do that with the counter lead, and then you can go around a circle with the counter lead because you're holding that lead. So if you're going to go to the left on the counter lead, so the right lead, your hip is forward, this is back. You're telling this leg to be the power leg, but then your upper body and your reins are telling the horse to go that way, to the opposite direction. So the horse is still going to be wanting to curve to the right because of that lead, but eventually as they become more supple and more flexible, they can actually start to become more straight and then maybe even curve on the circle doing the counter lead. So that means they are absolutely straight up and down, balanced and straight. Then they do that, and they can comfortably do this without being overloaded in one limb or the other. And that's how you get your bounce and lift in the paces without having any kind of fallout for, leg damage and limb issues. So that is the basics of the seat. I'll do another presentation on the leg, but the seat is actually the most important because that tells the horse what you're doing and where you're at. And even my horse, which he is currently very green, he just learned how to trot or how to respond to the trot. Every time I adjust my leg a little bit and try to make sure that I'm in correct position, because he kind of throws me off a little bit, mainly because he's green, and he kind of wiggles around, and I have to put my leg back into position. He'll feel this and then go straight up into the trot. Now, I'd rather have that than an unresponsive horse I'd rather shape his movement than have no movement at all. So I'm okay with this. But that's how, and even Western riders, that's how you want your leg. You want to have your stirrups long enough so that you're basically standing. So I'm putting my feet on the floor right now. I'm just going to put 10% of my weight in my foot, and you can see how that lifts my pelvis off. And so now this is 100%, and now I've got 10% on the floor, so 10% in my stirrups. You can see that helps elongate my leg a little bit. But that also narrows the space between your legs ever so slightly, that you might have some constant contact with the saddle. So that's sort of the disadvantage of stirrups. I mean, you get more stability, but then you get more tension as well. So getting a kind of like a neutral result from it. So you want to train the horse to not respond to every tiny, tiny little signal. You want to slightly desensitize them, but keep them sensitive enough that you don't have to use extreme measures to get them to just move forward or just move to the side. So I hope this helps you, and I hope this explains the seat a little bit better for you, at least the classical seat versus a modern seat. So, you know, classical seat, modern seat. You see the difference? I know it's a very slight difference, but it's the biggest difference on your spine. So please get yourself educated, ride your horse, be kind, and have a wonderful day. So here I want to show you a few clips on the following seat at the walk, and then the last clip will be during trot transitions. So as you can see, my lower body, since it is stable and following, it doesn't really have a whole lot of perceptible aids. Since he's doing more of a free walk, I am using more of a following seat. And as you can see, with the stable seat, you have a stable upper body, and then you have a stable hand because you have a stable upper body. Here's another view. Watch with the following seat and the relaxed lower leg. And then I will weight my outer seat bone just slightly as we go through the curve. And then give him steering aids with my seat. Now here's the backup cue. So what I want to try to do is teach him how to back up with pitching my pelvis forward. This can also move into teaching him how to halt with that. I need to use a secondary aid, which is my hand, because he has been taught to move backwards off of the pressure on the nose, or consistent pressure on the nose. But eventually I will not have to use my hand for this. And here's another walk. Something a little bit more recent though. So I'm using my inner rein as the contact rein as we steer around this little serpentine here in order to change direction. You can see again it's a following seat. Legs are turned out. and they drape nicely over the horse, causing me to have a nice loose lower leg. Now here, I slow this down so I can talk about it a little bit longer. Here's some transitions in the trot. So he tried to transition without aids, so I pitched forward a little bit, and he came to a stop, which is what I'm looking for when it comes to falling out of balance. If his rider falls out of balance, I want him to stop. So that would be the aid for me, specifically, to slow him down. Now, I'm trying to reinforce this a little bit with my calf, and he goes into a nice strong transition. But we are working on transitions, and we're working more on sustained trot as well. So the first aid is always the back of the leg, like we were talking about, and then the secondary aid would be the lower leg. Ideally, he will move off of the back of the leg by itself. So we'll go around for another group of transitions. Now I'm working on him not trying to stretch down behind the vertical. It is a work in progress. But here we have a nice strong transition. I'm not worried about headset right now, but he does come into the contact quite nicely within a couple of strides. So again, I have an active lower leg to encourage him a little bit more to go into a trot. Which becomes more loose once he transitions. And you can see my seat is following his movement. And there you have it.